welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Curot Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 1982 classic movie, An Officer and a Gentleman. Now, An Officer and a Gentleman is a military training romantic drama that runs for 2 hours and 2 minutes long. It is directed by Taylor Hackford. The script was written by Douglas Day Stewart. It was also produced by Douglas Day Stewart and Martin Elfand. The score was done by Jack Nietzsche, which also featured an Academy Award-winning song, Up Where We Belong, by Joe Cocker and Jennifer Warnes. Of course, you know, you'll hear this song a lot on the radio stations everywhere. If you're into like 80s pop music, you will probably likely run into this song at some point in time. The cinematography was done by Donald Thorin, and the editing was done by Pete Zinner. And the stars of the movie are Richard Gere, Debra Winger, David Keith, Academy Award-winning actor Louis Gossett Jr. He picked up a Best Supporting Actor win. Lisa Blount, hard to believe she's dead. Lisa Eilbacher, Tony Plana, Robert Loggia, a very young, pre-famed David Caruso, Ed Begley Jr., and the late Victor French. Victor French, of course, was Mr. Edwards, Isaiah Edwards, on the TV series Little House on the Prairie. In the 9 years that I've been posting reviews on IMDb, as well as in the 1 year, maybe 1.5 years that I've been uploading videos on YouTube, I usually like to review the classics over the more recent films. And it's primarily to see if older films still have the flames ignited even to this day forward. And partially, and the other reason is because in my young life, I missed out on a lot of the more adult movies because at one time I had zero interest in them. Even though An Oscar and a Gentleman came out in 1982, 6 years after I was born. Yes, that's right, folks, I was born in 1976. I only just recently stumbled across it. Sorry for my tardiness. Just because my folks had talked so much about it, so I just wanted to know what the hype was about and to see if it will leave me with a lasting impression. For those of you who have never seen the film, it stars Richard Gere as a young man named Zach Bio, who has recently checked himself into the Navy OCS located in Washington, which is a major anomaly because there's only 2 naval air bases. One of them is in Newport, Rhode Island, and the main one is located in Pensacola, Florida. Okay, from the early scenes we discovered that Miles' life as a child was not a pleasant one. At a very young age his mother killed herself, and he was forced to stay with his father, played by Robert Loggia, who was also a military man who was stationed in the Philippines. His father's nurturing was absent since all he had on his mind was drinking and chasing prostitutes. Zach wasn't really prepared for the tough regiments that the OCS had to offer, and he's struggling in terms of handling commitment, let alone following authoritative figures. In some ways you could sympathize with him because of the fact that he's a loner, but also we can't really at first accept him because of the fact that he has no real regards for his superiors and doesn't seem to abide too well with superior protocols within the Navy Aviation Administration. Mayo is under the tutelage of a very tough but affair sergeant, a gunnery sergeant by the name of Emile Foley, played by Gossett Jr. And it comes to no surprise that their encountering was just on the horizon. I mean, Foley really toughened up this guy. I mean, he doused him with verbal abuse. He really kind of like roughed him up in many different forms, verbally, maybe even to sometimes physically, and he was going to do everything in his power to prove that Mayo was not worthy enough to be naval aviation material, and he was going to do anything he can to get him to DOR. I don't know what DOR stands for, so forgive my military ignorance. I think it means driven to resignation or something like that. I don't know. I'm not a military guy, so please forgive me on that. Mayo seems to excel quite well on the physical initiatives that the Navy has to offer, but academically is quite the other story. And this leads to Mayo forming a camaraderie with a fellow classmate named Sid Worley, played by David Keith, as he will do anything he can to get Mayo into the aerodynamics class in exchange for immaculate belt buckles and boots whenever there's a barracks inspection, I should say. The main setting for this movie is usually set in the OCS, and there's also a vital subplot that involves Zach, Sid, and a couple of what you call Puget Debs, who they meet when they're off campus during their weekends. The two ladies are Paula Pokrifke, played by Debra Winger, and Lynette Pomeroy, played by Lisa Blount, who are scrounging for military meat in hopes for a quick marriage proposal. It's really actually, they're both, these two ladies work in a factory, getting workers' wages, which is really not much to crow about. So they'll do anything they can to marry a Navy officer in hopes that they could get out of their doldrums. It's no different than sorority girls in university campuses. I know it sounds a little misogynistic, but in some ways it's not all completely inaccurate in description. These Puget Debs play riskier attempts to get their catch, like even going as far as to fake pregnancies or other things like that. Paula eventually hooks up with Zach, while Lynette is hooked up with Sid. Of course, the relationship between Sid and Lynette ends rather tragically, as Sid eventually proven that he was not made for the Navy aviation, so he went DOR'd. Of course, Lynette was not exactly very happy about it, and she eventually broke off with him. Sid eventually goes into a depression, and he kills himself. Whereas in the case of Zach and Paula, they've had, of course, their ins and outs, and in some ways she is also quite vital in helping Zach overcome his confidence in the field of teamwork and trying to break away from his loner ways. So in a way, she's not just, this one-dimensional factory girl worker looking for her catch. No, she is actually playing a pivotal role in helping build Zach's confidence towards teamwork and also even to help bolster his social skills, you know, to be the best that he could be. So after 33 years, I can safely say, okay, the rest of the way it's actually Sid trying to get through 13 weeks of the OCS training and while getting adjusted to Paula. Since Zack is actually the titular character, fans seem to pretty much know the outcome of the story, but that doesn't deprive it from being entertaining. So, to make a long story short, after 33 years, I can safely say that an officer and a gentleman has aged quite gracefully. There are a lot of wonderful scenes with many that just can't be beat. They are really that authentic. And who could forget when Zack confesses to Sergeant Foley after Foley was just about ready to kick him out. Foley persuades, Mayo actually persuades Foley that he has nowhere else to go and that you can't kick him out, and that I will work my ass off to excel, and I will take your abuse, and I will take the training seriously. Please, don't kick me out. I got nowhere else to go. And then who could ever forget the final scene where Mayo has now been an ensign. He finds Paula in the factory and walks out with her, and his colleagues all stand with an applause. Just a pure magical conclusion. And even though it might seem cliche that, you know, it's one of those happily ever after stories, but so what? I love a good story that ends with a happily ever after implemented into the story. Okay? Not all stories have to end in grim and disparity. Of course, you know, it's kind of a bit of a hasty thing to say that these guys will live a happily ever after and just wrap things up. It didn't feel forced, it didn't feel contrived. And, you know, I like it in the end when good things happen to good people. So, a big applause to that. The pacing of the story was also very well structured. And now, even though the film was almost at the 2-hour mark, there was never a boring moment. And that was because the romantic scenes never interfered with the OCS scenes, and it flowed in just a pure, natural way. And we also deeply care about the characters, and hopes that Zack and Paula stay a couple, and I hope they live happily ever after once the credits roll. So overall, to me, if I was to give this movie a scale out of 10, it definitely gets a 9 out of 10. It is highly recommended. I guarantee you should see this movie. Even if you are a late bloomer like me, it's better late than never. If you haven't seen this, if you haven't seen this movie, and guess what? It still holds up today since its release back in 1982. It's a gem. And also I would recommend to get the soundtrack, especially the beautiful ballad that the late Joe Cocker and Jennifer Warnes did for Up Where We Belong. Let's face it, when Jennifer Warnes does a duo with a performer, she's like magical than some of her solo stuff. In fact, her best songs seem to come from duos. Up Where We Belong by Joe Cocker, based on An Officer and a Gentleman, and then 5 years later in 1987 with Dirty Dancing, she also performed the ever iconic Time of My Life with another 60s performer, former member of the Righteous Brothers, the guy who sings with a more bass voice, Mr. Bill Medley. She is just purely dynamic when it comes to duos. I mean, I never really heard any of her solo songs. Her two songs stand out are when she's duoing, I guess if there's such a word, during soundtracks. I mean, she also picked up I think she picked up an Academy Award for Time of My Life. I know it was a Grammy-winning one, but I'm not sure if it was she won an Oscar for that. I'll have to check that out. Well, I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in, and you can leave a comment. You can subscribe to my channel if you like, and if you write a comment, I want you to be kind, be courteous, don't be rude, and I will be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Corrupt Writer saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.